Iman for organizing this panel and her partner organization. I shall not murder their name. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about women, water, and migration in Africa. I want to begin with some Yoruba proverbs because I'm Yoruba, and I'm apologizing because not everybody is, but I'll give the English translation, and I'm also apologizing because I don't have facility in French. The first proverb I'll tell is Omilenio, and it says, people are water because they flow. And I'll explain this a little bit later. There's also another proverb, and it says, whoever throws water forward will walk on wet ground. That is, if you do good, you'll reap the rewards of it. And then Fela, who thankfully, because of that musical on Broadway, I don't have to introduce too many people here. But I grew up in the same town as Fela, and his shrine, his first shrine, was a stone's throw from my parents' house where I grew up. He said, he has this song, Omi Olota, water, you don't get any. And the song goes on. It says, if you want to bathe, you need water. If you want to cook, you need water. If your head is hot, water is the thing that cools it down. When children are growing up, they need water. If water kills your child, you need water. If there's nothing that you can do that doesn't require water, and water doesn't have any use. If you want to fight water, you might die in the process. And he says he's talking about the power of black people. He says black men, because Fela is a little misogynist. But his mother is a feminist. You know, his mother was a feminist of record and of note. So for him, water doesn't have any enemy. Anybody that fights water will die. And I think this is instructive. Water is vital to life. The first proverb I said, Omilenio, people are water, says that people flow. And it shows us that the Yorubas and many African communities who have similar sayings get it. Although they did not know Western science when this saying came about, they knew then when this saying originated, and know now that we human beings are water. Western science confirms it by telling us that we are mostly water in our constitution, in our makeup. We show that we are water when we move from one place to another, when we develop relationships, when we help one another. We do it when we just are. Then, evoking the second proverb I gave, that whoever throws water forward will walk on wet ground. If you do good, you'll reap the rewards of it. This also evokes the values that Yorubas hold dear, the ideals that we must, as human beings, do good. This is the notion that whatever goes around essentially comes around. Then when Fela said, Omi Olota, water you don't get any, he meant to tell us that water is such a necessity that no one can possibly hate it. One could also interpret the Fela lyrics as meaning that water is an inevitable part of life. We cannot do without it. Until humanity decides to consciously change things, women worldwide are primarily responsible for ensuring that family well-being is served. In Africa, a lot of the work that it takes to nurture families devolves on women. Finding water, fetching it, using it, and making sure that there's enough for the needs of the family are all tasks that women take on, mostly assisted by the children in their families and communities. And most families and communities actually impose this work on girl children. UN estimates tell us that by 2000, there were 16 million international migrants out of the continent's continent of Africa 796 million people. This was an increase from 9.4 million out of 277 million Africans in 1960. These are population movements within the continent alone. So 16 million of us Africans are mobile. And these are incomplete statistics because the people who gathered it from the United Nations Population Division also tell us that they don't have the figures from 19 countries. And it's also a woeful undercount because I think this is one of the things that really bothers me. African governments have not been very good on giving us, clear statistics on issues of concern in the African continent. I'll move on this. In comparison to the other major areas of the developing world, Africa has had more than double the number of international migrants. So the share of Africa in terms of the worldwide number of international migrants, however, has been decreasing steadily since 1980. And in 1980, the figures that they gave is that it's about 14% of Africans, of all populations moving. And now we have 11% in 1990 and about 9% in 2000. That's up as a percentage of the total migrations in the world. Okay. So in the last 20 years, Africa's share of the world migrant population has been decreasing. But we shouldn't kind of be very comfortable about this. There are a lot of other statistics that I have. I only have 10 copies of this. If people are interested, they can look at it. I didn't collect it. The Migration Policy Institute did, and they did this from UN figures. So I have those figures here that show you the trends from from 1990 to 2000. So people can take some if they want. I also, it's just 10, so people should please share. Okay, I'm going to skip really and talk about what I said in an earlier piece, that human migration is as old as life itself. And scholars confirm this and tell us that about 80,000 years ago, it's two. Okay, about 80,000 years ago, human life beings moved from Africa to colonize other parts of the world. And I say human beings move around for many reasons. Economic crisis, driving the need to attain a better life, is one reason why people move. Some such migration is caused by lack of economic opportunities. Some of the migrations are caused by environmental degradation and climate change, and some by food insecurity, some by the need to find a safe haven from war, from persecution, and from crisis. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa agrees on this. And today, I think that all these reasons can be classed under the heading of globalization, which is moving people from less to more affluent, less secure to more secure areas in the world. And many of those effects are more glaring today, but the processes have been with us for a very long time. We have just decided to begin to notice them more intensively and to focus on these effects more systematically. In testament to the long-standing nature of migration as a human phenomenon, we can find many illustrative examples in the African continent. And I started off as a student of history, and we talked about great migrations in the African continent that occurred as a result of innovations that human beings made in their lives in kind of trying to relate better to the environment. So during the Iron Age, people moved. And during the subsequent ages of innovation in human history, I will not also concentrate on this. But a lot of movements occurred when wars of conquest were waged by expansionist states, forcing the people who were determined to escape this crisis that they set in motion to flee in search of refuge. You're going to ask, what does this have to do with women, water, and migration? A lot, and I'm going to get to that. There was also the transatlantic slave trade, and the trade in slaves that went via the Indian Ocean on the eastern part of Africa, and the one that went through the Sahara. Some scholars call those forced migrations. I do not like this phrase, forced migrations, to describe the enslavement of people and their removal from their homes, their loved ones, and even the continent to feed the big mouth of commerce. Men, women, and children were enslaved, and we should use those words to capture the genocide that occurred as a result of these movements, not forced migrations, because it kind of simplifies it in a way that's not necessary. I'm not going to focus on the slavery-imposed movement of African peoples, however, but I'm going to look at contemporary diasporization in the continent as among the kind of issues that I focus upon in my paper. Among such diasporization are the migrations that I recalled before as caused by prolonged economic crisis, drought, desertification, and the environmental degradation that these and many other phenomena have caused in the African continent. According to experts like Aderonti Adepoju, who focuses on migrations within the African continent, increasingly African migration is feminized. That is, more women are moving than men. And an expert from the UN population population-focused institution agrees. Her name is Zlotnik. In the past, men moved first, their spouses followed, they said. Today, women are not only moving, many are leaving their husbands and children at home and becoming the primary breadwinners for their families when they move outside the continent. Some of these movements are very disturbing because they have to do with the trafficking of people who are looking for alternative livelihood strategies for their families. I'm also not going to concentrate on that, but it's important that we mention that this is part of the movements that women are making out of desperation. Okay, so Zlotnik tells us that female international migration within the continent of Africa was lower than in the other world regions in 1960, but that by 2000 it constituted about 46.7% of the 16 million migrants in the continent. This is a figure that outpaced Asia's 46% and Latin America and the Caribbean's 45%. There are other areas of the world that have over 50% female migration, but Africa is closely following those in its 46.7% of total migration within the continent figure. Zlotnik also tells us that statistics demonstrate that increases in the female migration in the African continent are rapidly outpacing those in other parts of the world as we speak. So, if we look at these movements, there are also regional differences as a result of deliberate government policy. So that you see that in the Southern Africa region, 30% of the population movements were women in 1960, 42% in 2000. West Africa has the highest, 41 to 42% in 1960 and 48% in 2000. North Africa, by comparison, experienced a decline from 49.5% in 1960 to approximately 43% in 2000. These are UN figures, based on the fact that they are also saying that they don't have complete information from about 19 countries. Okay, so I see many of these movements as part of the way in which the operation of the capitalist economy that we have in the world today compels rural and urban migration, such that people who were left behind in rural communities are predominantly women, children, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, and those who are unable or unwilling to do the available menial jobs that Africans are recruited for in the world economy. While such migrations can be found throughout the African continent, Southern Africa stands as a significant example of this phenomenon, both historically and contemporarily. The mining and industrial sectors in Southern Africa, mainly located in South Africa itself, use many of the rural areas of South Africa and Southern Africa as labor reserves for the mines and industries in South Africa. Other demands for labor come from the agricultural sector and even the household economy. So due to deliberate state policy under apartheid, Black African populations in South Africa have historically been pushed to the most marginal lines. The result is intractable unemployment, that is, an unemployment that doesn't seem to have any solution, as well as the extreme impoverishment of the heavily populated rural areas that become virtually denuded of men for given periods of the year due to secular migration. As a result, and what we're saying of South Africa, you can also observe in other African regions, because West Africa, as I said, is an area where you have a lot of these population movements as well. And apart from the movement of mature women, you also have movement of children who are absorbed into household economies to be housemaids and houseboys, and sometimes to be agricultural laborers. Now, I've been talking so much about migration. How about water? When you have impoverishment that is a result of living people in rural populations where there are few jobs and where the resources might be overstretched as a result of intensive settlements, you also have a lot of instability that occurs. The case that I am focusing on in Southern Africa shows that the economy of these rural areas become transformed sometimes from an agrarian one that is based on subsistence, because the land that is available is not enough for subsistence, and so there's a transformation to capitalist production. But that kind of capitalist production is the most extreme, and people are not able to meet their subsistence needs, and they don't have enough economic resources to purchase the things that they need. And then water, potable water that is clean and healthy water, is less available, and women must do water purification. One of the things they noticed in one of the areas that some scholars focused upon in South Africa is that you have increased amount of food insecurity. So there's insufficient food for families. There's a lack of potable water, and there's increased burdens on women and young children who have to expend more energy to locate and fetch water and also purify water for their communities. In this Southern African community of about it's a district, about 750,000 people, women have to transport 25-gallon drums of water in wheelbarrows. Or those who cannot afford to do this have to carry the water on their heads in big containers and walk very long distances and this water is not potable. So when they get it to their homes, they have to boil, they have to filter, and anything that they can do to make this water usable for their families in a way that doesn't hurt them. Exclusively women, and then I say girls, who are being groomed to take their positions as providers of free, unremunerated labor on behalf of their families, have to do most of this work. High levels of infant mortality due to diarrhea, due to kwashiorkor, and HIV/AIDS that doesn't have anything to do with water, is some of the stuff that happens to these families. There are also other causes, but the fact that a lot of the deaths are caused by diarrhea means that waterborne ailments, waterborne diseases, are very serious public health issues in this community of 750,000 people. And what they're saying here in Southern Africa applies to West Africa, applies to my country, Nigeria. We tend to also see this as a rural problem. I grew up in Lagos. Lagos is one of the most overcrowded mega cities in the world, and it has a tremendous water problem. Because if you live in Lagos, you have to buy water, or you have to make a borehole if your house belongs to you. And when you make a borehole, then you have to become a water purification agency so that the water is usable. But many families in Lagos, if they're affluent, if they're middle class and upper, they would buy water from these water merchants that transport water to their homes in tankers. And then they would have their own individual water tanks to which this water is put, and then they have to do the purification. This consumes a whole lot of resources, it consumes a whole lot of energy and time of women. And my sisters, I have 3 sisters still living in Lagos, they would put these big jerry cans in their trunks, and they would fetch water, maybe from their workplaces, and transport this water home. They have to carry the water and put it in places where they can secure it so that people don't steal it, and all kinds of contortions that women have to go through, even as they're professionals, in their jobs. It consumes a great deal of time. So the idea that these are issues just for rural women is not true. In Nigeria, many urban women have to deal with water problems. And this problem impacts on both rural and urban women because if we have growing desertification, if the Sahel is extending, if the Sahara is extending, then it means that we're going to deal with more and more water insecurity issues in the continent. It's affecting people who are highly mobile, like people who are nomadic. Because when the nomadic populations don't have enough water for their own use and for the use of the animals that they raise, that are an intricate part of how they sustain their communities, they're going to encroach on land that more settled populations have. And you have these causing problems of conflict between people who say, these are newcomers. Never mind the fact that some of these movements of the nomadic people have happened, for millennia, and people who are more settled, who feel that this land belongs to them and the water on the land they must use, they're having conflicts. African governments have not responded either appropriately or adequately to many of these challenges. And so you have eruptions of violence that occur in these communities that cause a lot of devastation to lives, to property, and to the well-being of people. So issues of how to deal with environmental degradation, with people's security of access to clean water and to reliable water supplies are issues that tie all communities in Africa together, whether they're rural or urban. Now, for rural populations, because of the wanton neglect that has occurred as a result of colonial policy that continue today in post-colonial Africa, we have dropped the ball. And we need to again refocus attention to the crucial nature of water and the need to access it reliably as one of the most important issues that the African continent faces today. I think it's atrocious that there are people who are profiting by selling water, and it's also causing other environmental problems because, for example, you have some of these commercial concerns that either bottle water or put water in disposable plastic containers that people, and they're not bottles, they're like the plastic, made from plastic sachets. They have started, these sachets have now become part of the, detritus that's floating around many African communities. And this is, this plastic doesn't degrade. So, and we don't deal with it. It's called pure water. So we feel that we have made a breakthrough, and this is a livelihood strategy for some women too, and men. It's a good thing that people are making money, but we need to think about how we are going to recycle if this is how we want to go. But I don't think that this is a sustainable strategy if we want to solve the problem of access to clean water in the continent. And we need to think about it not just as government working top-down or international organization that wants to go and help the Africans again, but we need to bring together local communities, especially women, to figure out how we're going to solve the water problem. And then again, I have to say that this profiting from water is something that came about with the structural adjustment programs that came to solve African indebtedness. Instead, what I see is creating opportunities for some to profit and other people to use more of their legal resources to access clean water. Okay, so I think the problem of water remains a challenge for us, and we must think about this as something that links the rural and urban communities together. I think due to the gendering of society, in a manner that domestic work and the work of raising children, caring for the sick, all of these things need water. Because this work devolves exclusively on women or more heavily on women, the burden and challenges of access to water, the work of purifying the water, and I know I'm repeating myself, and stretching sometimes very meager family resources to purchase water because it falls on women exclusively. We have to think of this as a problem not just for the women who are doing this because they have to, but a problem that affects each and every one of us, men and women. I have 5 minutes, wow. Okay. Some of these problems of migration affect people who we have decided to classify as refugees. The number of refugees in the continent of Africa has escalated progressively from 79,000 people in 1960 to 6.4 million people in 1995. Again, remember, it's an undercount. Because in the 1990s, some conflicts that occurred in the continent were resolved successfully. Refugee numbers were lowered momentarily. But then we had other wars that emerged at the same time, and so we have more increases. Now, the numbers of the people classified as refugees have actually diminished, considering the size, the increase in the population in Africa. But some of the diminution, some of the lower numbers is also because African governments are refusing to classify people as refugees. They say they don't have any money. And some of this is genuine. But a lot of money is also wasted on other things. So I'll just say that. So African countries are now reporting that they only have 3.6 million refugees in 2000. This is a 44% reduction from 1995. This is fakery, okay? Because the refugees exist, but people don't want to classify them as such, because if you classify them as such, you have to take care of them. So local communities, some of them who are really struggling with nitty-gritty livelihood issues, are also having to help informally to take care of refugees that governments are not classifying as such, so that they don't have to bear financial responsibility. So I'm saying that we shouldn't celebrate such reductions, and that Africa still has high percentages they're just hidden. I'm going to move. I want us to capture the essence of our discussions this morning as involving what scholars have couched as the impact of climate change on development and human welfare, particularly in developing countries. All of us are aware that we've had sudden, inexplicable, and severe weather swings back and forth. Sometimes it's hot when we expect it to be cold. Snow doesn't fall when we expect it. The ice caps are disappearing. There's also a lot of threats that this is contributing in terms of flooding, in terms of some communities actually thinking that they're going to be buried by water. So many people's way of life, their survival, their communities are being threatened in strange and inexplicable ways that is causing a lot of threat to their lives and to their well-being. These extreme weather events, as some scholars call it, involves storms, floods, and hurricanes. So where there's insufficient water in some situations, we have water everywhere for some people and not a drop to drink. So you might have, massive amounts of water and you still don't have the capacity to use that water in a way that sustains life. Instead, it becomes a real threat and danger to communities. There are also many gradual environmental changes. There's the drought that comes from desertification. And in West Africa, since we're very close to the Sahara and many of our countries are in the Sahel, we have these threats that's kind of waiting to pounce on us. Many people are suffering from the effects in very real ways. So we have to think of how to balance these issues. The fact that some people have too much, the fact that some people have too little. And how do we help every one of us? I think we have to step in and help ourselves. First of all, we don't pay too much attention to governments. Well, I'm out of time. We put pressure on governments. We have to organize, not agonize. We have to put pressure on government. So I want to take the end of my presentation as the beginning. I want to echo not myself, but the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in asking that we consider these questions that are embedded in the climate migration nexus, that is the connection between climate and migration. That climate and migration, the relationship that it has significant implications for human vulnerabilities. Migration is an adaptive mechanism. People take these measures sometimes as emergency measures because they want to cope with the risk of displacement. They're being moved out of their communities, or pressure is being put on these communities in very unhealthy ways. And these pressures are of considerable threat to their lives, to their livelihood, and to their well-being. Also, these pressures affect socio-economic structures, including gender relationships. Also, we have to think of what kind of community resources do we have that enable us to cope with these changes. What kind of pre-existing migration patterns do we have, and how do they impact on gender relations? How does climate change impact on populations? We've learned a lot, and we can also learn more by drawing on the knowledge of ordinary people and the solutions that they've made. So in kind of drawing on this knowledge basis, we can make policy recommendations, and I could tell you a lot about that, but I won't. There's need for multilateral cooperations. International organizations need to start foregrounding the needs of ordinary people and not feathering their own nest by paying all these people that really don't produce much in terms of real changes that people feel that make them experience well-being in their lives. I also think that a lot of policies need to be thrown out because they're not working. I think that people must be considered experts in terms of the nitty-gritty of what they feel, the ways in which they have solved problems, and we have to work with them to make sustainable solutions. I think my colleagues will be talking about some of those solutions, and I really apologize for going over time, but it's jet lag that caused it, because I just came from Nigeria 2 days ago.